If this is your first time on the channel and you want to know everything there is to know about living in Redondo Beach, California and the surrounding South Bay area, then hit subscribe so you can stay current in what's happening in Redondo Beach. My name is David Coe. I have lived in Redondo Beach for over 30 years and been a realtor for the last 20. Myself and my team at the Coe Real Estate Group, we love to help people navigate the move here to Redondo Beach. And whether that's 9 days or 900 days away for you, we would love to be connected with you. All of our contact info is in the description, and we'd be happy to help you make a smooth move to Redondo Beach or the South Bay area. Hey everyone, David Coe at the Coe Real Estate Group. Hey, welcome back. We're talking about all things home ownership, home buyership, and today I actually have a friend of mine, Richard Sperling, here. He's a family law attorney. We're going to actually talk about what happens maybe at the end of a marriage and the effects that it has on real estate, but we're also going to touch on maybe some things to think about if you're buying a home on how to take title. So, Richard, appreciate you joining me here today.
Thanks, David. It's great to be here.
Why don't you introduce yourself and kind of tell everyone your background?
Well, I have a unique background as a family law attorney because I was a real estate attorney before I pivoted into family law for many years. And now my practice is exclusively family law, where I do premarital agreements, postmarital agreements, marital and palimony claims, and divorce, of course. So I've got that unique background of working in real estate, which helps a lot.
Well, we're going to focus on that part of it, the real estate today. I know there's a lot of complex parts of divorce. Usually the home is, I always find like it's the last piece, right? Usually once they kind of settle everything with the home, it tends to be the final straw in the termination of the relationship.
It's so important that we're talking about this because in many families, the home is the most valuable asset, and it's what holds up the divorce. So it's these issues are really important to discuss.
Well, let's jump into it. So, obviously we're here in California, community property state. When there is a divorce, I guess the first question is, can one partner or spouse act independently of each other? Can they just sell their share in the property?
Well, we should start out by talking about California law, which is unique because California is a no-fault divorce state. And what that means is, unlike some other states, it doesn't matter if one person committed adultery or committed other wrongful acts. If a house was acquired during the marriage, it's presumed community property, which means it's owned 50-50. And as such, neither spouse can sell their half or can move to sell the property or even mortgage it or pledge it as security for a loan. It's community property. Everything has to be done jointly. So that doesn't apply to property that was acquired prior to the marriage, but it certainly applies to community property.
And that's all property, primary residence, rental property, any property they own fall under that same
Correct.
stipulation.
A spouse has authority to sell personal property until the divorce is filed. So you could buy a car together, and as long as one of you are on title, and that person can sell the car or sell the piano or the guitar. But real estate's unique. It's community property. One spouse cannot sell, which is different from joint tenancy with right of survivorship. A lot of realtors suggest to their clients that they take title as joint tenants. In that ownership class, you can sell your half or pledge your half for a loan. So it's different from community property where you cannot sell your half or pledge it as security for a loan.
Well, that's a great question. We get that asked all the time, right? New buyer, new couple comes in, they want to add, it's one of the questions you get on the escrow questionnaire is how do you want to take title? Of course, they ask me and I remind them I'm not an attorney. They should speak with an attorney.
Well, that's good.
You are an attorney.
That's good. And a lot of times I'll get calls from real estate brokers, and one of the spouses has signed a listing, and the broker's really excited. Wow, I've got a listing here. We're going to move forward and advertise and market the place and sell it. Sorry, that listing is invalid unless both spouses sign it.
In that instance, does it matter if they took title as joint tenants or husband and wife? Like, what's the difference between those two ways of taking title to a property?
That's a great question. I teach community property at a local law school, and we spend a lot of time on that. Because whether you buy property as joint tenants or as community property, if you're married and you acquire it during the marriage, it takes the class of community property, and then one spouse cannot sell. People file for divorce And they don't realize that when you file, your case is assigned to a judge and automatic restraining orders go into effect. And so once you file for divorce, you can't sell real property without the permission of your spouse. Even if you own a house on your own, you're solely entitled, you cannot sell it once you file for divorce. So there are huge consequences to filing.
So taking it as joint tenants, you could only sell your share if the marriage was still active. But once you file for divorce, it doesn't matter. It's community property. Both of you have to agree.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Sometimes we, in a premarital agreement or a postmarital agreement, we can address those issues. So I might own a house, or we might own a house together, and we might agree in an agreement in writing to say, if somebody files for divorce, I get first option to list and to buy you out of the house, or I get to stay in the house for X number of months or years. But we can address that in these agreements. But if we don't, then we really reach a stalemate where both spouses have an equal right to live in the house, even though they're not talking. Both spouses and neither spouse has a right to sell. So if that's not addressed in a premarital or postmarital agreement, you reach a stalemate, and then the lawyers get involved, and of course that becomes very expensive.
I mean, look, most divorces, I'm sure, are not friendly. When you're living in the house together, like how does one spouse get another spouse removed from the home? Is that even possible?
That's a great question, David. In the old days, we had to have an act of violence, and then the party would go to court and convince a judge to kick the perpetrator out of the house. These days, we have a relatively new law called the Domestic Violence Act. And you can go to court and allege that your spouse is harassing you, impacting your emotional and mental health, or disturbing your peace. And a judge will issue a restraining order kicking out the other spouse just on those grounds.
Hmm.
And when that happens, that act of disturbing the peace or domestic violence can impact spousal support and other issues. So these days, it's a lot easier to remove a spouse in a divorce. Now we don't like it when parties know that, because they can run to court and use that Domestic Violence Act as a strategy. But the bottom line is, it's easier to kick your spouse out of the house now using that act.
What happens if it's just mental anguish? What if both spouses claim the same thing?
Well, then the first one to get to the judge can kick the other one out of the house. It's really a loophole. It's a terrible area of the law. But after the Rob Reiner tragedy and after O.J. Simpson and what happened in that case, we have these new laws where the judges bend over backwards to keep people separate and avoid violence. And the consequence is it's relatively easy to kick a spouse out of the house.
Yeah, I guess it's the overcorrection, to what used to exist.
Right.
When there is a divorce, does the house have to be sold, or can one partner stay in the property and buy the other one out?
Sometimes in a divorce, we go to court and we say, Judge, help us. We want to sell the house now. I want to list and sell the house now. I need my half of the equity now so I can buy something else because we're not living together. It's very difficult to get a judge to force the sale of the house while the divorce is pending. However, when you get to the end of the divorce, if parties don't enter into an agreement, they get a date to go to the judge, and the judge decides what to do with the assets. On that date, the judge will almost always order that the house be sold. And there's no law that helps us decide who gets to keep the house, or at that point, the judge will just order it sold. There is one law, it's called the Duke Award, and that law says that if mom is in the house and the kids are minor children, they're with her, and the kids have mental problems, and it would be traumatic for them if the house were sold, she can ask the judge to allow her to stay in the house for a period of years until the children are doing better, until the youngest child graduates high school. So that Duke Award does allow mom to stay in the house for a while if the judge will order it. But without that order, when you get to the end of the divorce and you get in front of the judge, a judge will order the house sold that day. And it's arbitrary. The judge will just decide which spouse gets to pick the realtor, what the price will be, and all the other issues. It becomes quite arbitrary at that point.
We've done quite a bit of divorce work, and it's always challenging because usually when you sell a regular house, you've got buyers and sellers. In divorce, you've got two sellers, which are usually going against each other, and a buyer. So it brings in a whole nother party. I have a partner who's a female, and usually what we'll do is one of us will represent one of the spouses. And when the two spouses may not be able to talk, but me and my partner can, and then try to figure out what's the best way to move forward. But even that's really complicated. They're really, really hard sales. It's a lot of emotion involved when you're selling the family home.
And as you know, David, each spouse is likely to be represented by an attorney, and each attorney brings in their own baggage. And I've had a lot of cases where my client and I are ready to settle, and even the other spouse is ready to settle, but that spouse's attorney doesn't like the settlement terms and won't cooperate. So having each owner of a house represented by an attorney can really make things complicated. That's the reason why a lot of times we'll use a premarital agreement or a postmarital agreement. We'll encourage a husband and wife to realize that many marriages end in divorce. That's a good idea to address these issues in advance. If we own a house together, who's going to have the right to list and sell? Who's going to have the right to appoint the realtor? A lot of times we address that in a premarital agreement.
Well, Richard, I appreciate it. Look, I know it's an uncomfortable topic, but I am of the age, and I'm sure you are too, where we're having a lot of people in our peer groups that are going through this. So I figured it was good to put together some content on this. If someone does want to get a further consultation with you on some of these issues, how can they find you?
Well, I don't charge for initial consultations or to chat on the phone, which is unusual these days for a family law attorney. They can reach me at my office, 818-991-0345, or sperlinglaw@hotmail.com. And let's not forget the predicament that people get into when they're not married and they buy a house together. And we often enter into cohabitation agreements or help people resolve those issues.
Well, look, you're watching this video. First of all, thank you. Be sure you like and subscribe down below. And, if you are looking at potentially some of these situations, please, I encourage you to get in contact with Richard. It's free, at least for the initial consultation, and make sure you get some good advice. So, Richard, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, David. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.